crowd in front of the bima was just impossible to describe. I, Baruch Hashem, had a place 3 rows back, right in front of the bima, in front of the middle of the bima. In other words, I would be facing the Rebbe directly. And I would never give up on that. But that place brought me so close to the Rebbe, close enough. So I was all the way in the front. Anybody who's around the bima, around the bima in 770, there are tables. Anybody who stood at the table, the people who were standing in the very front, they had to bring with themselves pillows because it was the pressure was so strong, it was so tight. So many people were there. The whole Crown Heights, obviously, even the ones who daven in different shuls would make a break for 2 hours and would go to 770 for Tekios. Then they would go back to their shuls to finish. But everybody had Tekios by the Rebbe. The Rebbe was going to blow the Shofar. It was packed, just jammed. And everybody wanted to get closer. And so people who were standing in the very front, they had to have pillows, or else there would be a deep indent on their stomachs for a few days. That's how precious it was. And so because of the pack, it was so packed, ready by Shlishi, which was always the aliyah that the Rashad got, by Shlishi, they would start making a path for the Rebbe to come up to the bima. The Rebbe was going to be called up for maftir. And they had to make a pathway beginning then. It was unbelievable. The pressure, they called it the washing machine because the whole thing would be moving up and down because of so many people being there. But where I was, it was not moving. It was just incredibly tight squeeze, so tight that the floor beneath you became slippery from sweat and from heat. It was like they're mopping the floor. It was soaking wet on the bottom as well. It was hard to keep your feet firmly on the ground. It was so tight. On the second day of Rosh Hashanah, the Rebbe said the Kaddish for the Rebbetzon's sister, Rebbetzon's Shena, was murdered in Treblinka on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. And so the Rebbe said Kaddish for her on the night and then by day. So the Rebbe didn't wait for maftir to come to the bima. The Rebbe came before maftir, right at the middle of the 7th aliyah, to be able to say Kaddish right after Kriya. Behind the Rebbe went again Rabbi Groner and Rabbi Klein, carrying the pidyonis, the packages with them. And they held on to those packages. They would put them down on the bima only before Tekios. But in the meantime, the Rebbe is getting maftir. And the Rebbe would be saying the Haftarah. And both days of Rosh Hashanah, the Haftarah is very moving, very, very emotional stories. And the first day is the story of Hannah and her husband Elkanah and Penina, and that she wanted children, and then she went into the Mishkan, and Eli was accusing her of being shikar, and in the end she had a son whose name was Shmuel, because she was going to give him to Hashem. Don't forget, the Rebbe's mother's name was Hannah, and she passed away, and Hashem made tshuva. And the Rebbe would often cry, bechiyas, in the different tefillas that Hannah would call out to Hashem. Also, on the second day, there's some very beautiful description from Yirmiyah Hanavi about the Yidden and the end of Golus, and the words "V'shovu bonim ligvulam," the children will come back home, and Koyamar Hashem, Koy Baroma Nishma. There, it starts with Koyamar Hashem, but Koy Baroma Nishma. Rachel is crying for her children who are in Golus, and be some beautiful parts over there. There's some very, very emotional parts, and the Rebbe would cry already by the Haftarah. In the later years, from the Mems and on, were very little Bechias. Sai in the Farbrengens and Sai in the Haftarahs, just in Rosh Hashanah. And the Rebbe said Haftarahs. All the Haftarahs that the Rebbe said were in a very soft and calm and beautiful song. It wasn't an announcement. It wasn't a laning like a kriya. They were very soft. And unless you stood close, you didn't hear Haftarah very well, unless you had a place. And there was a Stupanish for Haftarah every Shabbos. But in Rosh Hashanah, it was the beautiful words of Chana and all that. By the way, they had special machzorim. We would hold, you couldn't have these big machzorim. We'd have a little pocket machzorim this big that you were able to keep in your pocket or you were able to hold in your hand just enough in this crowd. If you didn't have a pocket machzor, you're in trouble. You couldn't come with those big machzorim. When the Haftarah was over, in Kaddish, Yisrael v'yem hazikaron, the Rebbe would take the pidyon. The Rebbe would look back, and Rabbis Grona and Klein would put the pidyonis down on the bima, and they would be so that the bima was pretty big. The Sefer Torah, of course, was not on anymore, and the pidyonis would be placed at the end of the bima. And the Rebbe was standing in the middle of the bima. The Rebbe would then take his talus and lift it up over his head and place it, like throw it, over the entire bima. And the Rebbe went down. You saw that the Rebbe's figure under the talus was down with the pidyonis, with those packages. One of the more amazing scenes, there was a pin drop. Thousands of people in 770. It was quiet. The only thing you heard was the fans. The fan whizzing, blowing. That's it. It was complete silence in the entire 770. And all you had was the Rebbe bent over a bima under the talus. Sometimes for 20, 30 seconds. Sometimes for a minute and sometimes longer. There were certain years when the Rebbe stayed down quite a long time and you would hear mamish bechias, sobs, wails coming from the Rebbe. The entire bima would be shaking. The whole talus you would see would be shaking sometimes. And then the Rebbe would lift up the talus, but only to the Rebbe's eyes. You saw almost always the Rebbe's face was red, and many times there were tears. Even if you didn't hear the Rebbe crying, there were tears like on the Rebbe. And the Rebbe would, by holding the talus just over his eyes, the Rebbe would burst out. Lam natseyach livnei keirach mizmer. Just like that. And it was like a shudder went through. Because in the Haftarahs, the Rebbe was soft and quieter. Here, the Rebbe was like a chazan. And it was a cry. It wasn't just Lam Natseyach Livnei Keirach, it was the Rebbe saying it. And I remember every year like a shiver going through, even though you knew what was coming. When you heard that, you were transported by that. The Rebbe would then take the talus and do the same thing. You'd go right under the talus over the pidyonis, and the Rebbe would stay under the talus to say the 7 times Lam Natseyach Livnei Keirach. The Olam was davening. It was loud. And little by little, everybody finished the 7 times Lam Natseyach, and the Rebbe stayed under. And it was again silent. Everyone knew that this is big time in Shemayim, and we're watching Ba'aretz, we're watching something amazing. I forgot one thing. Before Kriya, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas Katz, who was one of the Gaboim in 770, would make an announcement. And he would say, this Kriya is coming now, and then there's going to be Hachonis to Tekios, and there's going to be the Tekios themselves, and by the laning, by the Haftarah, by this, nobody should stand in any boxes, they shouldn't be pushing, everybody should stay where they are. And he used to always finish off with this line. Everybody should know where you are standing and before whom you are standing. It didn't help. I mean, there were still boxes and mices all over the place, but this was part of the Rosh Hashanah scene. Anyway, the Rebbe's under the talus, and it's quiet in 770, just complete silence, utter silence. It's hard to imagine that. Thousands of people. And just the Rebbe is under the talus over there, standing high on the bima, and under the entire bima is under the Rebbe's talus. The Rebbe would then, at the end of, when the Rebbe finished the 7, Mizmaitim, the Rebbe would lift up the talus, and the Rebbe would hold it so that his eyes were covered. Not completely mamish, but the Rebbe's eyes were looking down on the Siddur, but you couldn't see the Rebbe's eyes, most of the Rebbe's eyes. And holding the talus like this, the Rebbe would say the psukim. Min ha-meitzar korosiko Ononi v'merchavko. And the Olam would repeat after the Rebbe. K'li shim'o k'chazdecho Hashem k'mishpotecho chayeni. Like slow with the niggin. And sometimes the Rebbe would stop. Sometimes the Rebbe would break down and cry. Sometimes the Rebbe would change somewhat of the words of the psukim. And one year, I think it was in Tismach, the Rebbe said, Arayv avdecha l'toiv. And the Rebbe, the next word is Al Yashkuni Zaydim. These are psukim from Kuf Yates, so we should be familiar with them. But the Rebbe didn't say Al Yashkuni Zaydim. The Rebbe said Bal Yashkuni Zaydim. And there were other things like this. And then the final pasuk, Allah Elikim Bisrua Adai Shem Bekel Shofar. And then, when those psukim were over, the Rebbe would again go under the talus just for a very short while. There's a Yidotzen that is said then by the person who blows. Just once. Some years the Rebbe did this here. Many of the years the Rebbe did this before. What did the Rebbe do? The Rebbe would make a seder with the shofars. This was one of the more himmeldike things that we ever saw. The Rebbe had the shofars lying on the right-hand side. And the Rebbe had these tichelach. The Rebbe had these like handkerchiefs. There was a white one, and there was a red one, and there was another white one. And the Rebbe wanted to wrap all the shofars in these 3 tichelach. And sometimes the Rebbe put the white, red, and white, and sometimes it was different, and sometimes it didn't quite close. The Rebbe would sometimes spend 3 or 4 minutes on this. This was also everybody would like try to see, like, what is the Seder over here? Nobody can figure out what the Seder was. This was also a very unique thing about covering the shofars with these tichelach. And one of these tichelach, at least one of them, were from one of the Rabbeim. Then the Rebbe would make the brachas. Baruch atah Adai Shem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kilishonu B'mitzvosov V'tzivonu Lishmei Kel Shofar, and a roar from the entire crowd. Amen. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Shehecheyanu V'kiyamanu V'higionu Lizman Hazeh. And again, Amen. And then the Rebbe would blow the Tekios. The Makri, the person who appointed, would be Rabbi Shmuel Levitton, who passed away at the end of Tafshin Lamed Daled. And Lamed Hey and Lamed Vov and Lamed Zayin, there was no Makri, but in Lamed Ches, the Rebbe asked Rabbi Tenenbaum, who would be the one who blew the shofar the rest of the Tekios after the 30 Tekios from Yusuf, after the 30 at this point. The Rebbe asked him to be the Makri. It might have been Lamed Tes, but he was the Makri from then on. At the end, after the Tekios, the Rebbe would say the 3 psukim in this way. Also, so melodic, so sweet, so beautiful. Ashrei ha'am yodei seruah adai shem be'ed panecha yehalechun. That was the first pasuk. The next pasuk, B'shimcha, Rebbe would raise the tone. B'shimcha yigilun kol hayim u'b'tzidkascha yadumu. And then most of the years, the Rebbe would raise the tone again for the third pasuk. Ki siferes uzamei ata uv'tzeinecha tarum karneinu. Those were the 3 psukim. Shtapchas and nefesh, just phenomenal. That you just the wrap up of Tekios that way was just so beautiful. Then the Rebbe would say Ashrei, wouldn't say Ashrei loud, just start saying Ashrei right at the bima, and then the Rebbe would follow the Sifrei Torah down. The Sifrei Torah went to the left side of the bima. Usually when the Rebbe went off the bima, the Rebbe went to the right side. The Rebbe turned around and went down the right side because the Rebbe came from the left side. But this time, in honor of the Sifrei Torah, the Rebbe went down following the Sifrei Torah on the left-hand side.